I wanted to start out, maybe someone, John, would you go and read this first stanza? This is the opening stanza of the third part of Book 5.
Return, O man, O brother and sister of me. Return, O myself, before the tide turns at his speaking. And we are carried by his Noah's flood, whitherward like fools, dragged in an open boat on the ocean, to the way of art and God. Stay with God, for he is not only the almighty creator, but our brother and friend. His counsel is better than the wit of men, for he is deathless, and men are born to die. His knowledge and existence. He is knowledge and existence, and knows all the paths to him, and leads those by the short path who surrender their path to him. He stirs up the urges and urges forward. He retards and holds back the right time.
Should be to the right time.
He drives one on to glorious victory. He hurls another into defeat. Andromache shall not receive thee, Hector, Pallades, glorious arms. Andromache shall not receive thee, Hector Pallades, glorious arms, for this would be to rob Theseus of victory whom God had promised.
Okay, so here you see a statement of the great theme. And this is the first occurrence of this phrase, stay with God, in the book. He starts repeating this phrase over and over again. So Book 5 is really is where Francis really begins, undertakes, you might say, the project Abode gave him, which was stay with God. Everything else, in a sense, has been a prep for that. We've gone over this a number of times for those of you who have been to previous sessions, but the first 3 books out of the 5 were, as I understand it, kind of showing who Meher Baba the Avatar is. The first book is Life Story, 1955. The second book, The Beloved, to whom Francis sings a love song. The third is the universal God, whose story is played out through the entire creation, the impersonal universal God. So you're getting a complete picture of him, you might say. And Book 4 is how to get to him, the steps to his feet. Now he's really taking on the question, how to stay with him. And Book 4, as we were talking about last time, is 2 weeks ago, I think is really addressed to true seekers of God, to people who are really for real about wanting to find God and get to his feet and get to into the Darbar of the perfect master, in this case the Avatar. But Book 5 is addressed to all humanity and all posterity. And I think it's not narrowly a injunction to stay with God on a personal level, although that certainly is there, but the entire culture and civilization to retrue itself. Culture should stay with God. And plainly Francis feels that civilization, modern civilization, has lost its way and lost its connection with God. So it's quite a big undertaking that he's taken on in this book. It's quite long. Book 5 is actually more than half the entire poem. I have a line count somewhere or another, but I think it's maybe 55-60% of the entire poem. Quite extensive.
So, Ward, I'm a little lost. 2 weeks ago then, we finished up on Book 4?
We finished book 4, yeah.
Okay.
And that was the steps to his feet, and every stanza ended with the perfect master.
Okay.
That one. It was short, it was a very short section.
And so we're part 3, it says?
This is part 3 of book 5.
Book 5, okay.
And book 5 has 4 sections. This is the structure again. You're looking at the beginning of the 3rd part. 4 sections plus a 5-stanza coda. Actually, it has a 1-stanza preamble. Then 4 sections of 40 stanzas each, right? You've seen that number before. Book 3 had 40 stanzas plus 1. Book 4 had 40 stanzas plus 1. And now we have 4 sections, each of them with 40 stanzas as part of this numerical pattern. Chalisa, I don't know if you've ever read Meher Chalisa, Nigam's poem. Well, the Chalisa is a standard form in Hindi poetry. It's 40 verses or 40 stanzas. So Francis seems to have come to that for the last few books of Stay with God. And these stanzas are numbered, actually, all the way through. And I very strong, now there are other people, of course you guys can all speak up too, because a lot of you have been reading this for 40, 50 years, and read it deeply, and know a lot about it. So, just chime in or correct me, or there was a great session I went to one time when I was a graduate student, where it was a sort of a philology club, and different people's, graduate students and professors, would give a presentation on their field work. So one of my professors was in the evening, was giving a thing, and he'd gone about 45 minutes into it. He's just getting to his thesis, and he said, "The point that I've been trying to make in all this is this." And at that moment, by sheer coincidence, right outside the window, one of the students shouted, "Bullshit!" So you can always make your contribution in that form. Should you choose. I thought it was quite inspired. It took about 5 minutes for us to get going again.
This was some student who had nothing to do with it.
Just walking by, totally unaware that anything was going on.
And he was talking to somebody else.
Yeah, he had no idea that we were there.
Nevertheless, it impacted on him.
Yes, it was a great moment. I mean, you couldn't miss it. You just
Poor guy.
Well, we can't hear anything out there,
that's right. They could
so
shout.
you're on the ball.
They could shout all they want. We won't even notice. Yeah.
Oh, is that word you said about Chalisa? Did you say Chalisa? It's
Yeah.
like chalice.
No, it means 40.
Yeah, it's
But it's-
Chalisa is an Indic word, Hindi.
And it's
40.
it's the structure.
No, it means 40.
It means 40.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
it means
okay.
40. It means 40.
Oh, okay.
That's 40, you see.
Right, okay.
I'm saying that this is a standard form in Hindi poetry.
Right.
I don't know if Francis knew that or not. It seems very likely he knew that. It's part of the numeric, the symmetry, part of the symmetry of the whole thing. And it closes with a formal coda. It's actually called a coda, and it's 5 stanzas. And he's come to 14-line stanzas now. He began with a 7-line stanza as he began his epic narrative, and as we've seen, a 6-line stanza for the love song, a 10-line stanza for God Speaks narrative. I'm struck by there having been 10 states of God, and 5 live stanzas for the section which ends each stanza with perfect master, of whom there are 5. But now he's come to the most expansive sonnet stanza form, and in fact the entirety of Stay with God, as we looked at in the first of these sessions, is a formal sonnet, an Italian sonnet. And the very last of them is also a sonnet. It, in fact, here's right here. this one. The final stanza of the entire Stay with God is a sonnet. Yeah.
I'm just volunteering to read it.
Yeah. Sure. Why don't we do it? Why don't we come to? Let's finish up. Go right to the end.
Begin to finish.
Yes. So
So
have I
have I
read.
writ what love told me to write, and every line betrays my poverty of love. As a poor man asked his charity, displays a single shilling to our sight. Yet I'm somewhat contented of my plight, in that rich love stooped down to ask of me, thus honouring me in whom no others see worth, myself the least. Thus does love with light and gentle grace encourage on his way the least of us, taking each by the hand he's laboured with, using the same labour to raise him to still greater favour, even, perhaps, to love's own path, to stand in light when silence speaks its shining day.
A really magnificent ending to this thing. So you can see the sonnet form begins with an 8-line group and then a 6-line group. This is the Italian sonnet. Shakespearean sonnet closes with a couplet. So right, poverty, charity, sight, A-B-B-A. Plight, me, see, light, A-B-B-A. Way, hand, labor, favor, stand, day, C-D-E-E-D-C. So that's the Italian sonnet form. And Francis hadn't written guzzles yet. That was to come in the next decade. But when he did, he also continued to use a 14-line form. They're couplets, and every guzzle he ever wrote that I know of has 7 couplets, which adds up to 14 lines, of course. So he was, I think he had written a lot of sonnets in preparation for Stay with God. And from time to time during this last section, he'll use the 14-line form in a way that is not quite a formal sonnet, but begins to hint at it. Like here's an example. This actually is a very different rhyme scheme, but he starts going into a sort of a short staccato rhyming. Someone's invented a gadget, or a new form of budget, or different smelling soap, or a new cereal, or the improved scope of radio aerial, or the odds of horses. This is what people read nowadays. Or some social behavior courses, or other various kinds of unusual belching. What is unusual belching? Farting. Right. They keep our feet squelching. You see, he's actually made a rhyme out of that. In the veil of mud, across heartward and response, and the soul dancing a jig or a rock and roll, nuzzling a carrot, suspended from the point of the bayonet. You know, it's like a donkey. Come, little donkey. This is sort of like an anticipation of a big fist in the world at world's end. But this isn't a sonnet form, but he's sort of playing off it by using a rhyme. And here's one that's closer to being a sonnet. I'm talking about some of the formalities that he's using. Yeah, we'll get to content in a minute. Yeah, here. This is a lyric plea, you might say. And we'll have to go to the next page, but you can see A, B, A, and then there's going to be a B. It's not iambic pentameter, which would make it a sonnet, but it's using the Shakespearean sonnet rhyme scheme. O sun, when will you break through the encircling night of our day? Cherish our hearts. Spill gladness, and set our feet dancing in your holy way. Blossom your azure. O sun, burn with your diamonds our web of fears, not our tears. So you see that now the scheme is C, D, D, C. Not our tears alone, our full cup in measureless measure. O sun, The earth is ripe for budding new treasure. The heavens await a new studying of instant pleasure, of your light for you. When will you break our sleep in dreaming, our holy feet awake? I'm not even looking at the content. These final couplet, right? So that's the Shakespearean sonnet form, closes with the couplet. So this is something about the form that he's using. And just one note, I don't know, maybe here in Australia, I talked about this more in the West, people maybe aren't so accustomed to Francis there, but this caustic, highly critical note really comes to the foreground here in Book 5. And so some people find it off-putting, or so we talked about this in an earlier session, but I just want to say that in my opinion, in reading Stay with God, I don't think anyone is obliged to accept every opinion that Francis had. And that's, to my mind, isn't really the point. What I do find always to be present, even in his harshest criticisms, is he is pointing to a false value there. And his eye is very acute in that respect. Like John's here as a painter, I was several places, the Renaissance comes off very badly in Francis's view of it. We'll talk about that later. But in Renaissance painting, one of the things he's always attacking is a false perspective. You know, in the history of Western painting, perspective it was discovered, they say, at the time of the Renaissance. You know, perspective where it looks like a three-dimensional thing. And when I took my little bit of art history way back in high school, they presented that as though that was a great discovery. And people before that just simply hadn't figured it out. It's sort of like these oafs of pre-Renaissance painting didn't know how to do that. I don't imagine anybody who teaches art history would say that anymore. But Francis doesn't tolerate that at all. It's like that's ridiculous. They were doing a representation of the real, and this is a false perspective, a false three-dimensionality they were giving. So he'll really beat them over the head for that. But you see, there is a real point in that. The earlier painters weren't trying to give a so-called realistic representation of the external world. They were trying to present eternal values. So even if you might spring to the defense of a Renaissance painter on the score, that point is really a deeply insightful one that he's making. And I would really say that about just about everything that he says, all of his harsh criticisms and indictments. Do I need to go on about this? I think most of you are probably well enough acquainted with Francis or know this poem well enough. But when I was in America, some people took offense. Anyway.
Did they have any good arguments?
Well, there was one woman who was very upset with his negative depiction of the Renaissance. And he certainly gives it's kind of a perennialist point of view of it, where the real rupture occurred then. So we could have more to say about that. And I mean, there's no denying that the Renaissance had geniuses, falling off of every tree, it seems like.
Well, they started standing in front of their paintings, didn't they, in the Renaissance? Like, the artists were all known. And,
Yeah. In the Middle Ages.
Their chest and stood in front of them,
That's right. Whereas in the Middle Ages, they were anonymous.
Yeah.
Actually, that's the thing, John, that comes up in one of his ghazals where he talks about singers as well, where the pride of the singer entered the song.
Yeah.
That is the death of the song.
That's right. And he says that about Dante also, in the domain of poetry. Some of it, and one thing, when Francis starts really taking people to the woodshed, again to use that phrase, the only ones he takes to the woodshed are the big ones. He doesn't pick on trivial little artists like he goes after Dante, right? I mean, he would be in my short list of the 5 or 6 greatest poets of the Western world, and I think probably Francis too. You know, or Shakespeare gets a very mixed praise, shall we say. He was good when he wasn't selling out, right? And Beethoven too. So it's not, I mean, he really took on the great ones. So I mean, clearly he recognizes their greatness. But his point was to show where the culture went wrong. And what everyone, you know, your view maybe of this in the last analysis, I think many people, or perhaps most people, would agree with this, to look at the modern world, that something has gone wrong. I mean, that really does seem to be the case. I think all around the world people are feeling that. And Francis is saying we haven't stayed with God. And that would seem to be true. I mean, would anybody say that this is a world where people are, you know, obsessed with finding God and staying with God? I mean, nobody would say that. God has been just thrown out into the trash can. So he really is pursuing his theme and showing how civilization went wrong. And his intuition and critical acumen in recognizing falseness and values is quite extraordinary. So in almost everything he says, I'd say in everything he says that I can see, he's really got a good point. So I think that's the way to read it, and not worry about if you might happen to like somebody who he seems to, you know, fly. Okay.
Did Francis ever take you to the woodshed?
He took everyone to the woodshed. He'd give everyone a hard time, wouldn't he?
Yeah. He wasn't one to mince words. He wasn't one to sort of flatter you.
No, that's right.
He only had a few years to train on you.
Yeah. I remember once I said, well, you know, this happened and that happened. Jesus, Francis, I felt such a fool. He said, that's a good start.
Yeah, there's a story of Margaret Crass where she, you know, she was one of the world's great dance teachers, and she had in a class, there was some guy who thought he was hot stuff, but in a beginner's class, and wasn't really making an effort. So she called him up in front of the classroom and said, "You're a beginner, aren't you?" And he said, "Well, yes." And she said, "Well then, begin." So she was at the same school, you might say.
Oh, yeah.
Well, Margaret and Francis got on well.
Margaret and Francis did?
From what I've heard.
Oh, I was always wondering. I wondered, I'd never heard that they met. Did they meet?
I think they did, but I'm not sure. Oh, don't quote me on that. But they,
I'd like to know, because I've
Yeah.
always wondered about that, because Frances was in New York for a couple months in '52, where she lived and worked. And she was a great...
yes, I think they had a very similar approach to
Yeah.
fools, actually.
To what?
To fools.
Yeah. Suffering fools gladly was not their
Not
thing.
a strong point.
Not their strong point. Where
Not
someone like
that
Kitty Davy would suffer them gladly, no end.
But actually Francis did suffer some people.
Yeah.
Well, he suffered us, John, so it was a bit-
Oh, yeah, he also gave us a hard time, but it was a little bit hard to read exactly who he would show quite a lot of compassion through.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then some people, we've got to really copped a stone wall and a belt in there.
Yeah.
Not always so much why.
I see.
To me,
Uh-huh.
maybe it could be looked at.
Well, in the artistic world, some people definitely got a belting.
Yeah.
You know, he tends to pick for that people who are really representative of some major theme or trend that he wants to bring attention to. So I was going to focus on a couple of themes. Today, I was going to talk about a couple of major themes, and then look at what I'm calling the historical narrative. There's a recurrent historical narrative throughout the entirety of Book 4. And I would call it a kind of a narrative of the fall, of the civilization and how it really fell into its current condition, with an eye towards Avatar Meher Baba's incarnation as Avatar and the redemption that he'll produce. And there are certain elements in this storyline, and it keeps starting up, and then he'll go into other things, and we'll start up again. But that's a very big part of this. So there's kind of a cultural history, you might say, that goes through that. So I'll get to that in a minute. But some of here are the three themes I wanted to look at. One is his idea of art. This is actually the main one. And then, as lesser themes, what he has done with the sun-moon idea, and I can't even read my own handwriting. The vertical axis. Just these are smaller themes, but big, important ones anyway, that we've seen before that will come up here. So, on his treatment of art, that is right in the very title of Book 5. In fact, as always, all of these books, their titles are really, significant, worth paying attention to. The Book 5, God-Man as World Axis in Living Perfection of Art. The Divine Sun of Reality shining through the mists of illusion. Now, some of you were in some of these Sufism sessions we've had, and you know what is the Islamic word for a Sadguru?
Kutub.
Yeah. And that means the axis or pole. And can you think of any nice axis pole-like things we've already seen in the Stay With God? Like wings towards the glaciers of Kailas? Kailas, right in the first line. That is the opening figure brings us the vertical axis. Kailas is, a physical, natural object that is like that, that's spanning between the horizontal plane and the vertical. So I'll be looking at some other examples of that. So right from the very first line, it's there. But now he's really coming to it. The kutub is that, the pole, the axis around which the entire universe revolves. So, and living perfection of art. So the idea of art that he wants to express is much bigger and more universal than would normally be understood by the word. I know, even though I was in that line myself, when I was in graduate school and as a professor, I found poets and artists to be very off-putting, because there was always this thing, well, I'm a poet, sort of like, and then when I introduced my poem with 20 minutes of talking about myself, and what I was feeling is, who the hell cares? I sort of feel as though you're some sort of a special person. Anyway, that was I sort of bristle when people start talking about art sometimes. But I don't bristle when Francis does, because he means something quite different. He means actually the supreme act of art, he says, is right in the title, is the descent of the Avatar. That is art. That's the living perfection of art. In fact, let me go to this. Right, the big section on art, the biggest treatment of it is the first 10 stanzas of the third part. There are 4 parts to Book 4, right? So like this one right here. The art of God and his finished works, the living man. This is God's art. These, like Wamadeva said, my glory is like the mountaintops. Lao Tzu said, how I glory in the breast of my mother. Hui Ning said, you read it to me and I'll tell you what it means. So he's giving these one-line encapsulations of something essential about each of these. In other words, these are God's own works of art. They are it. And in fact, let's just go right to it. The very opening stanza here declares this theme. Right here. Anyone want to read this?
Art is an act of love in likeness of itself. Spirit moulding matter into lovely form. God's compassion as Avatar unto men. And men's devotion to Avatar as God. By God. For devotion is by grace alone. Avatar is his own act perfectly. Before his different names, speech retreats in confusion. Before the living one, the one present on earth in one's life, one can only say, "Oh God, oh God," and weep and wait. Wait the round of his time and the poetry of his word to inform us in likeness and paint us in livingness. Devotion is winged sacrifice under the shadow of his wings, flying to him. An arrow crying in the night for dissolution in love's mark. The dew of morning diamonding his sun as a necklace for his throat. His act in us for him.
Right. So there you really get his idea of art. And there are two kinds of it, or there are two degrees of it. This is the one. Avatar is his own act perfectly. And the second is devotion is winged sacrifice under the shadow of his wings, right? So what's the metaphor here? Devotion is winged sacrifice under the shadow of his wings. Anyone? In fact, we hear some of them right outside. Bird. It's a bird metaphor. So devotion is little bird, and Avatar is big bird, right? So we're under the protection of big bird flying over us. So the real art is this. Avatar is his own act perfectly. And then this is about the effect of his act of art, how it, overcomes us and makes us helpless with love for him. That's the real art. We just saw his real works of art, the perfect ones, Hui Ning and Lao Tzu and so forth. And the second degree of art is the art practiced by creatures still in bondage, would be most of us, except for those of you who may God realized here. And that art is where you're approaching on your way to God and praising and describing what you see, you might say. So in all of this, the point of art is God. God descending or people arising towards him. And so right there you can see that the whole modern conception of art is different.
Yeah.
I would safely say.
Yeah, sure.
Different.
Yeah.
Well, it's all about paycheck too.
Yeah. Well, like there's that classic thing of,
Yeah.
that classic thing of in Florence, up one end of town you've got Michelangelo knocking up this big 9-foot high perfect statue of this boy,
Yeah.
and up the other end of town there's Fra Angelico painting
Right.
monk cells with scenes from the life of Jesus, and when he's painting the crucifixion he's weeping, So like that's the
Have you ever been
difference,
there? There's that
Like
monastery.
Michelangelo is amazing technically, but the subject matter is, a little bit off. He gets a bit off at times.
Yeah, Francis definitely takes Michelangelo to task for that. Sculpture without Zen, that's one of his terms.
Yeah,
In other words, the outer perfection, but the inner
yeah,
truth has not been mastered.
Yeah.
But there is a lovely one which was hidden down in the basement, apparently, in the Louvre, where I wasn't meant to go.
Ooh.
But they didn't have any sign saying don't go, so I
Oh.
went. And it was the rebel slaves. And the thing of the forms coming out of stone, man coming out from
Ah,
stone.
Lovely.
And it was extraordinarily powerful. But also there's the creation thing.
Mm.
Starting from stone, coming to man.
Yeah,
The man in stone.
yeah.
Michelangelo's.
Yes.
Yeah. In fact, Francis uses, I meant to come to this later, but why not? At Allura, this would be the Allura Caves, Hylos, another part of this whole complex. They have cut living memorials to God in stone. Out of stone, God has carved living flesh ready for light, etc. And then the entire evolution is carved by God out of stone, out of contrariety. But here's another his biggest treatment of the subject of art comes in the book, the third part, the first 10 stanzas. He really develops it. And this is a very good statement of it. Number 5, someone want to read this?
God made sense turn outward. Therefore man looks out. Now and again, a daring man looks back and finds himself. Now and again, after becoming God, he speaks. This speaking is the first art.
Right? So we have the two kinds of art, and this is the first, the speaking of one who has attained. A perfect master, or avatar, we use too.
Often on the homeward track, as the divine image becomes clear in outline and volume, he sings its praises. This is the second art. The lovers drowning in the sweetness of love's smile. A Jesus, the way. An Ali, a door.
What is this about? A Jesus the way, an Ali a door.
The Avatar. He's the way. The
Jesus, this would be the first art. Who's Ali?
That's
Muhammad's.
Muhammad's error.
Muhammad Zarich. So he would be an illustration of the second art, a very high version of it, to say the least. Now you don't think of Ali as an artist, but you see, to Francis he is, actually.
Now and again a man sees, by God's grace, God, now and again, was it a full stop there?
Comma.
There shouldn't be this is a poor scan.
Yeah. Now and again a man sees, by God's grace, God in another man, and dares surrender himself to him. Becomes clay in the master's hands to be moulded into truly human form. A canvas for a new portrait, truthful in line, exact in volume, and lovely in content.
So this is the second art. So like this would be Ali. You saw God in another man and dared surrender to him. Ali did that too. I mean, he crossed over from Jesus to Ali. But I mean, I would submit that this is also Francis. This is exactly what he's doing. In the state of God is the embodiment of this very whole thing. So this is his idea of art. And actually, the idea is kind of a simple one. Where do I have this? You might not think of this, I mean, this isn't talking about art type things, but it actually is the same idea. It's kind of a simple idea that he's expressing. And the life of the spirit, is this the right one? Yes. About the relation between matter and spirit. It's really the same thought, I think. I'll see what you think. Proper adjustment between the material and the spiritual aspects of life is not secured by giving equal importance to them. It is not secured by taking something from the material and something from the spiritual and then striking a balance between the two. The spirit must and ever will have inviolable primacy over matter, but the primacy is not expressed by avoiding or rejecting matter, rather by using it as an adequate vehicle for the expressions of the spirit. I think that's what he's talking about. It's taking the world of creation and using it to express divine truth. That's art. Do you agree? Does it seem?
Yeah.
I mean, it's as simple as that, actually. It's not a new idea, and he wouldn't even begin to say so. By the way, here's another discourse that I think is relevant to all of this. He's talking about the East and the West, and the characteristic differences between the Eastern temperament and the Western. And he says, the West on the whole has developed more on material lines than on spiritual lines, with the result that the Western mind has a spontaneous urge towards intellectual and artistic things. Isn't that interesting? And that really does seem to me to be true. So many people, like people in their idealistic phase, most people go on to get regular jobs, as a matter of fact, but will say, oh, I want to be a poet, or I want to be a musician, or I want to be an artist, or like that. And I think what that is that the spiritual impulse in the West very spontaneously goes in towards art and somehow sees that as its outlet. And I personally think that's why it was a Westerner who wrote Stay with God. Because in the East, going in directly into spirituality in the spiritual lines and sort of is quicker and easier. You wouldn't think about art as the primary or only channel for that. Do you agree with that? Does that sound right to you guys? So Baba really got someone, Francis, who was of the artistic type and who really had gone into a whole bunch of the art. I mean, he had been a painter, he played piano and thought of being a pianist, he was a poet.
Yeah.
You even have this one slide of him dancing.
Yeah.
Maybe he should have, when he was in New York, gone in for ballet. It wasn't too late. He was 49 or whatever it was.
And it was a stone museum. That's all.
Stone, yeah, that's right.
Building
Yeah, it's certainly in his idea.
it, turning it into something real.
That's right. Out of God cutting out of stone. And that stanza goes on to say vegetable, animal, human, all these things. Out of the material of contrariety, he's creating lovely form. I'm summarizing what is actually said in that stanza. And you may remember in Book 3 of Stay with God, the second section of the passes through God Speaks, he uses stone and creating houses out of bricks as his dominant metaphor. He talks precisely about contrariety. So it's definitely art to him. Here are some other, here's another expression of what I think his art is in his view.
When Marilyn died, and his last message was the importance of
Repeating the name of God.
Do you find that?
I mean, I haven't really searched for that throughout the whole poem. It certainly does come up, though. Any of you notice that more about that?
It does say Baba, Baba. In Stay with God, I remember, Francis, to see Baba's name in every household.
Yeah.
I think it's John Kerry's, just give me a word, a lovely word.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Baba's name.
The theme of the word is a very big one in Stay with God, and sometimes it takes that form.
But it's actually the meaning and the taste of the word rather than just,
Yeah.
that's what it gives you, I suppose. It's not just the word, you like to do that.
It's a word that you nurture within yourself and then it issues forth in fruit. I think in the 7th or 8th stanza in this, he comes to that, about how that you actually need to get it from your guru, from your master. That's the foundation for art, is being given something. You really can't do it on your own. Because, we ourselves can't create anything.
Bernard has said of his father, John, that even though he was an extremely good artist, he didn't sort of pursue it because he felt he had nothing to say. Then, you know, like at the end, he made those beautiful points to his father. So,
Yes,
so, you know,
he found something to say. Yeah. Representing the perfect one. Now here, okay, now we're going to start getting some criticism of some of the deviations from this idea of art. And boy, he really, so much of modern justification of art is exactly this, where, you know, art is supposed to shock you and shake you out of your conventional thinking, as though by itself that is accomplishing anything. Someone want to read this?
The only reason for reviving painful experiences is to mature one's outlook, not feed excitement in others, sowing in them the seed of future pain, excusing it as legitimate communication.
I mean, so much of the justification of like a film, like a,
Yeah.
you know, a movie.
So many visual artists are into that at the moment, you know.
Subverting the last paradigm and then subverting that one.
Right, and just endlessly subverting as though you've accomplished something.
Yeah.
But that does, and now, okay, and now he goes on with this about, for reviving painful experiences, okay, like violent movies or things like this. Now the Mahabharata is full of violence, but it's nothing like this.
And he who is to become the Buddha, the inspirer of his time, the rest and spring of men for the next 500 years, was sheltered from pain until his mature mind could grasp it and subdue it.
Do you know what this is referring to? Do you know the life of the Buddha?
Yeah.
You know about his youth? Somebody?
Oh, he was never allowed to see any suffering
That's
when
right.
he was young.
One day he got out.
He got out. He had a charioteer who hadn't got the orders from his dad. And he went out into the city, and I think the first day he saw a sick man, and the second day he saw an old man, and the third day he saw a corpse, something like that. And it was only, he had not seen suffering in his whole life. That's the story. And when he saw that, then he realized that suffering is unavoidable, and he left the world. And his whole message was an answer to the problem of suffering, specifically, you see. But he was protected from it until he had reached a point where he could maturely respond to it. So Francis isn't saying don't ever show suffering, but how to respond to it in a meaningful way, that's the thing.
Being dragged through hell by the heels, or dreaming in one dream a star in lieu of a ripening breast. I light a harp, a kiss on the moon, she says, sprawling a nude across a canvas in rebellion, or peopling dead woods with faded musk of dryad. Are neither material nor impetus for art.
I don't quite understand these lines. Dreaming one dream in lieu a star in lieu of a ripening breast. Does anybody get that? I don't quite understand that.
Well, I sort of get the one dream,
Yeah.
but
It might be just like
well,
a
it's kind of a
fantasy.
sentimental
Yeah.
Fantasy.
fantasy,
Yeah.
sort of a weak sentimental fantasy,
Yeah.
and the reward is a
Ripening, yeah.
Was it any sort of reference to our increasing, because Francis also had the theme of how we reached into space,
Yeah.
and the West in particular reached into space, looking after, going towards the far stars.
Yeah.
But we'd always only ever find ourselves there. So instead of having a love relationship, we had
Yeah.
this strange thing of going after this receiving.
Yes. Maybe so.
I think it's this sort of anemic poet.
Mm.
He talks about it in a Big Fist poem where he's.
Yeah.
And so he said when we found him dead, we took him home to bed.
Yeah.
He was likely the text of food.
Yeah. There certainly is a major thing in Stay with God is how the perfect integration of the sun and the moon, Jalali and the Jamali, that we find in the Master, broke. And instead you have violence and sentimentality. And the Jamali side of that, the sentimentalized
Yeah.
feeling,
Yeah.
cheap sex,
Yeah,
like someone is sprawling a nude across the canvas.
Yeah.
You start to get that
Yeah.
sort of like,
that's right. And, it ties in with that first, to feed the excitement of others,
yeah.
and you'll do this, you'll get attention, hey,
Yeah.
look at this,
Right, something you've got a nude, and of course nobody is permitted to do that back in the
Yeah.
Lord's society.
So,
It's radical,
That's art.
so
Yeah.
one
Yeah,
bit
but-
of
so-called radical.
That's a great insight of Francis, is that the dark side of sentimentality is violent.
this violence.
Yeah, it is. They're actually codependent,
Yeah.
co-arising, you might say. Violence and sentimentality. And that's where this seems to come in. You might say, people in dead woods with faded musk of dried. You might say, well, how does that fit with,
Well, that's 19th century art.
19th century art,
Mm.
nature. We're going to worship nature. Dryads and all these sort of Greek.
See, that also comes into the thing, which is an Australian thing, where they looked at one stage of looking at women as either the saint or the whore.
Right,
Dan Wars of God's belief.
Yes.
right. Yeah. So this is the cheapening of the feminine, of that aspect of things. And then you really do see that. I mean, I'm no expert on painting it, but really for a couple of centuries that was starting to happen.
And associated with the British Empire.
Yeah. And then in the 20th century, all hell broke loose in every conceivable way. Where's the Brahmin who taught me? Do you know? The note will probably tell you. I think this is Rimbaud, who he rather liked. Is there a note? Somebody had their book.
Oh, did Grandpa know about the Brahmin?
He may have, yeah. You should check that, so I'm not purveying this information. It seems like he's on page 124 on something or another. In other words, this is the question. You cut through this bullshit. Where's God in all of this? Enough of this crap.
What splinters of Brahma, by the grace of the true teacher, might have informed him.
Right. You need the reality in all of this. Is the note there? Anyone?
Oh,
Illuminations by Arthur Rimbaud.
no.
Rimbaud?
Where
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
where is the
Brahmin
Brahmin
who taught me.
who taught me?
Francis seems to have liked Rimbaud. I don't know if you know Rimbaud, 19th century.
Oh, he was crazy about it. He asked Papa about it.
What did Baba say?
He said he's okay.
He's okay. Right. That's good. That's good. I think he died at the age of 30 and he stopped writing poetry at the age of 25.
Well, he went to North Africa and became a gun runner.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, he was kind of a...
He dropped off the poetry.
Yeah. And now here we get the theme of the word and its role in development of art. You have a reader for this?
The word also is food. Therefore, the real artists meditated on the word, entrusted them by their teacher, and disciplined their seeing to his form, till their eyes brightened with tears and praise escaped them. Then, at his command, they in their turn spoke to the people, in words or notes or line or chiselled plain, and the people were astonished. And being thus fed in their turn with the word of their work, the earth, fed the earth with the word of their work, the earth, and the breath of God, through the masters and saints, brought the rains and sun in due season, And when floods came or drought, they did not huddle in fear or curse the sky, but looked into their hearts to find the sin, and adjusted their sacrifice to the laws of nature and God.
So Francis is giving a whole vision of causality here. If you're true to the word given you by God, the natural order finds its proper balance too.
Where is it that there was something where that when man follows God, or
Yeah.
then nature will serve him? And
Exactly.
when man turns away from God, nature will turn away from man.
That's exactly the idea. And you know, I read early literature when I was a professor, and this theme is all over the place. I don't know if any of you ever read Sophocles' play Oedipus. At the very opening of it, there's a plague that has afflicted the town. And they all go to Oedipus, who's the king, and they say, "Save us." Why do you go to the king? He's not a doctor. But it's seen as a moral, social problem. And his assumption is there's some sin they've committed that has caused the plague. It turns out to be him. He's married his mother, you know, so it's this cataclysmic ending to the whole thing. But the root assumption is that these problems are, I need to look within myself to find the source of it.
Now see, this is what the modern world looks back and sees that as superstition.
Right, right. When it wasn't at all, it was this truth that he is expressing here. The source is within. Want to keep going here?
Without a word of the word in one's heart, without a reflection of his light,
That should be the same
whose
sentence, I
seventh
know.
shadow is the physical sun, in one's eyes that is, without the sacrifice having been made which is savour to God. No food nourishes, but is poison which paralyses and finally kills us to our essential self. With bricks of dead tissue do we build our vast hospitals. With the steel of maimed minds do we forge the knife which performs the operation. The world of nature, helpless from our helplessness, weeps. And from her overmuch tears roll the floods. Roll the floods, and from her shame and burning shines the sun of drought. Weeping and burning is nature because of our heedlessness. And the winds, finding no home, return to God.
The wind of the word. Right, right. So this really expresses that theme very, very clearly. If you want the natural order to be in balance, you have to have the word of the word in your heart and be true to it. That's, again, where art comes from. Let's see. Yeah, okay, and now this is the fullest statement of this whole idea. Anyone else like to read who hasn't? Jeff, are you?
Sure.
Number 10.
This is a moment in this section where Francis switches from 4 stresses a line to 5. So beginning here in
Wow.
number 10.
Jeff has sort of studied the rhythmic metrical structures in this, right?
So the artist, if he is to sing or write or paint, or play in truth, in praise of love, may not himself, but first find the golden thread by which he moves, the lovely note from which he has continuous becoming. Then find the holder of the thread, the lovely singer, and offer him his body, speech and mind in service, not asking in return the gift of art or anything, for even this finding and surrenderance is by grace. Grace which puts us under eternal obligation of repayment. Heaven and earth move by the word alone, and it moves out from silence. The mover is the perfect master, who holds the thread which binds each one together in one gathered piece of movement, who sings a song which is our sighs and tears, our well-directed thought and sudden laughter.
Beautiful.
Isn't that? Yeah. So this is again the first art, the mover, the song of the perfect master. And this is how we, that second art, how we grow and mature in that, by taking that word. We have to be given it by the master. It takes the gift of the master for that to happen. You know, I don't think we read this stanza when we were looking at the love song of John Kerry, but it's right on this. Let me see, is this the right one? Yeah. Where here he's in his praise and complaint mode, and he's complaining. He's been he's saying, don't complain, John, and then after another 3 stanzas, he's complaining. Right here, does someone want to read this? He said, my gods are diminishing since you are a jealous God, etc. Why don't we start from right here down to the end of this? This is on the same subject. We're now, as a lover complaining to the beloved, he's asking for the word. Same theme exactly.
Since you are a jealous God, one lovely in vanity of alone selfness, let the mill of you grind this to flour.
This is probably this poem. Probably. Sorry.
For the hungry of you, or let their hunger grow into a crop of hunger, so that they will the more seek you, and cast this as dust to the wind. Or when the grinding is done either to flour or dust, give me a word, a lovely singing word in my mouth. Some honey word, some wine word to utter in singing. Not for many, but for thou in my ear to delight in. So that my ear may aid mine eye to fix themselves, mine eyes to fix themselves only on your dear form. A singingness of the word, the lovely word of your name. Thou beloved one, you.
So, same theme. Right?
Yeah.
We have him asking for the word. I don't know whether he talks all that much about repeating Baba's name or not. Certainly Baba's name comes up.
But that's,
But this, the word is
Yeah.
definitely there.
yeah, that's
Yeah.
it, isn't it?
So you have to receive the word and it takes root in you and becomes the basis for your art.
Yeah. Mm.
Whatever your art is,
Mm.
you know, the perfect master is the final expression of this. So your growth, the molding of the form, the material of your life, the matter of your life,
Yeah.
into the perfect likeness of divinity. That's art. So in that sense, everyone is an artist. Wouldn't that be true?
Mm, sure.
And that's a much more appealing idea
Mm.
of art to me than
Mm.
snobby people who think that they're better than everybody else, which is what I felt I was doing with so much. Hear a little more on these, some other men. Let's see. Other ramifications of this.
I remember once, just in that area, that I was waffling on to him about art and this and that and one thing and another. And he said, hey, come on, we'll go for a walk.
Yeah.
So we went for a walk and they were building a house down here. I don't know whether it was Bill's or someone's. And they had the foundation, the trenches all dug, and they had all that reinforcing steel in there, you know, all tied together. And he was saying, hey, look at this. Look at it. What a beautiful job they've done. And up the other end, hey, no, come and have a look at this. What a beautiful job. Right around the whole house. Oh, look at this. What a beautiful job. Basically, you know, hey, you know, they're doing a great job, you know.
That's art.
That's their art, you know.
That's right. And he would be one
Forget
to
all
know,
this
having built
theory and all
America.
this shit, you know.
Yeah.
Having actually done that himself. Now this is this theme of a human being. you can see how this is relevant to the theme, right? The supreme art is to become a real human being. So that's why he brings these themes up here. Number 18, will you have anyone read that?
A human being, a divine man, taking who as of God, and deriving man from manus, mind. A human being, that final vehicle which spirit moulded with care and loving eagerness and informed, which the angels were commanded by God to worship, but which Iblis hated. And ever since have the devil's descendants hated it and conditioned it and twisted it to serve their purposes.
By the way, do you know who Iblis is?
One of the fallen angels.
Yeah, he would be in Islam what we would call Satan. Same one, that's their name.
A human being laboured towards through the endless ages of evolution, a man and a woman, blueprinted in paradise, Eden, fitted together precisely, and realised in actuality after the exile, an immeasurable wandering in the perfect saints, but perfected completely in the men God, the perfect masters, and in the God-man, Avatar.
It's the highest form of art. Now, another dimension to this art theme, which you've already alluded to, is this vertical axis thing, which came up right at that we saw with the cathedrals of New York, or the skyscrapers of New York, or the cathedrals of America. So that's the distorted, myopic version of the same thing. But Kailas, throughout the entire poem, keys into this theme. Remember, I don't know if you recall in the first book, I think it's just a beautiful section where he talks about talking about Baba, about to begin the great seclusion in the new life, and how gives the image of the Ganges falling on Shiva's head and the tears flowing down his cheeks, tears of suffering and compassion for the world. Right? Remember that one. Anyway, that too is that same Kailas linkage, the Shiva. Kailas is Shiva's place. Well, Francis gives this another dimension, this vertical axis Kailas theme, and the very central point of that is, let's see. Is it really that one? I don't think it's, I think I have the wrong number. I do. Okay. It's going to be right about here. Yeah. So number 12. In fact, before doing that, I'd like to look at a little bit of this book, which is in your library. I read it here about 2 years ago, The Holy Mountain. And Francis, a number of times, refers to Hamsa as though he's a perfect master or a very highly advanced soul. I don't know, anyone know if he asked Baba, mentioned this Baba? Anyway, when I read this book, I really, Fauci used to say, I got a shock. I got a shock. I had no idea it was a book of that kind. And it culminates in a really extraordinary, visionary experience. Now, who Hamza was a devotee of Dattatreya. Let me just show you, since we're going to have the adorative lover of Dattatreya. Where's Dattatreya?
Why did Bauji get a shock? Just came out.
That was just one of the things Bauji would say. Not about this.
Oh, not about this.
Not this. I got a shock. Those of us who work from him were very shocked. Shock. So here's images of Dattatreya, right? The Brahma, Vishnu, Mahesh. Narayan Maharaj was in fact a devotee of Dattatreya. So this Hamsa was a lover of Dattatreya from a boy, I guess. And I think his family, he was from a wealthy family, and they wanted him to go on and have a great career. But instead, he became a seeker. And his idea was that he wanted to go to Mount Kailas. And up on this, there's a little pond way up on it, maybe 19,000 feet or so, Gaudakund. And he wanted to actually have the physical darshan of Dattatreya. And it's quite an amazing, has anyone, Jeff, you've read the book, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And you have too, yeah.
Wasn't he in English? Lived in England? No.
I don't know, he
No.
might have been British educated. Maybe his parents had
Translated by Sri Purohit.
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
who was associated with Yeats, wasn't he? Yeats wrote like a 30-page introduction to
Yes.
this book. Huh?
It was on the slide.
That's
before.
mine. I must have thought he was English.
Yeah. That's right, I'll go back to that in a second. But so he did the book, a lot of it is about his trip to get there. And it was very, very arduous. I mean, nowadays it would be a piece of cake. But he almost, you know.
When did this take place?
This would have been like about 1905 or something like that. And when Francis was in, before he had found Sufism or anything like that, he read this book.
Oh.
And, or maybe he had heard of Sufism, I'm not sure, I think it was before. And he was very impressed that here is someone from modern times who had had the kind of experience that you read about in these, ancient sagas like that. I mean, they went through great hardships. They got captured by a bunch of dacoits and practically killed. It wasn't at all easy. And finally, when he and the objective here is to do a circuit around Mount Kailash. People do it now. It's, I think, 35 miles or so. It's one of the great places of pilgrimage in North India. It's right in the border of Tibet, China up there. And so here's how he describes his that experience. Let's read it because it's really kind of an amazing thing. We have a reader here, Gaudakund. This is the pond, way, way up in the hillside. And he almost died trying to get this pond. He had to leave the trail. And the first time, I think there was a avalanche or something, and somehow or another he got back to his base camp, where his coolies were. But then he made a second venture up there.
Gaudakund stands at a height of about 20,000 feet above sea level and is a natural lake about 4 furlongs in circumference. The peak of Kailash seems to be about 10,000 feet above this lake. Everywhere here was snow and ice, snow and ice. My lips became green and blue with the severe cold. My nerves seemed ready to burst, and respiration was extremely difficult. I was the solitary being in this place. Streams of ice from over the Kailash peak to descend down into the Garakund. There was water in the lake, but above it stood a layer of ice 5 feet thick. The layer had to be pierced with a steel-pointed staff. Then only water bubbled to the surface. Bathing was an impossibility. I walked over the surface of ice 20 feet from the shore and pierced it with the staff. Water ran up as from a spring. I dipped my fingers to sprinkle it over my body. I felt as if a deadly scorpion had stung the fingertip, or that it had been severed from the hand. The tiny drops of water turned into globules of ice as soon as they were sprinkled. I threw into the lake my setu, brought from Sri Rameshwara. In a moment it was coated with ice.
I don't know what a setu is. Do you remember that? Anyway, something he had with him. Okay.
Here on this lake, my object which I had cherished all these long years was fulfilled by the loving grace of Sri Sadguru, my master. My joy knew no bounds. The darshan of Sri Kailas, Lake Manas and Garakund carried away all the strain and stress of the arduous journey. My heart was elated. I felt that my life's ideal was fulfilled. My ideal was to have a sight of the physical form of the Lord Dattatreya himself, and to get myself initiated into the realization of the self. I was determined either to realize this or to die in meditation while sitting in yogic posture. I began looking in all four directions and then spread my tiger's skin on the icy floor of the lake, planting my staff on the right. I again looked at the sky and at Mount Kailas, crying, "Victory, victory to the Lord, my master." I stood for a few minutes facing the north. After this, I sat on the tiger's skin in the Siddhasana posture with my face towards the north. In short, I began to face the final ordeal. It was sunset. I closed my eyes and passed into meditation, all along trying to fix the mind steadily on a mental image of the Lord Dattatreya in the centre between my eyebrows. The first night I experienced terrible hardships. Bitter cold, piercing winds, incessant snow, inordinate hunger, and deadly solitude combined to harass the mind. The body became numb and unable to bear the pains. Snow covered me up to my breast, and till after midnight I was fighting desperately with my mind. My body helped my mind, and I thought both of them were bent on defeating my object. But self-confidence, determination, and my unbounded love towards my master conquered them in the end. I succeeded in subjugating the invulnerable enemies and was steadily riveted to my meditation, and as a consequence lost consciousness of the body and the world outside. It is so difficult to say anything further when I had passed beyond these things. Every moment increased the intensity of my yearning to see my master, and it was while I was in this state that I thought I heard a voice. I did not leave my meditation. Later on I found that the image which formed the subject of my meditation grew more and more dim. Yet I refused to allow my mind to leave its point of concentration. Instead I fixed it there with added determination. "Oh my child, oh my dear." I heard these words thrice but did not open my eyes, for the mental image of my master was still there between the eyebrows. I wanted to see the Lord Dattatreya in physical form, and naturally it was impossible for me to be satisfied with his voice alone. Moreover, no sight of a physical form was possible until the mental one had disappeared.
I wonder how he knew that. Can you imagine being in this and hearing a voice and not opening your eyes because he wanted the real thing?
As I was so keen about the physical sight, I did not leave my meditation, though I heard the call 3 times. At last, all of a sudden, the mental form disappeared. Automatically, my eyes were open and I saw standing before me the Lord Dattatreya, my master, in his physical form. At once, I prostrated myself on the icy ground like a staff and placed my head on his lotus feet. 3 days had passed like 3 moments for me. My master lifted me up like the Divine Mother and hugged me to his breast and caressed me all over the body. Thereafter he gave me the mantra, sacred words, and initiated me into the realization of the self. What a great bliss it was. I cannot describe that joy, as it is beyond any description in words. The master preaches through his silence, and all the doubts of the disciple are solved. Thus says a Sanskrit poet. You can take as much enlightenment from these lines as you find in them. Here my manas, mind, merged into antakarana, heart, and the antakarana with the manas merged into the chitta, mind stuff. The chitta, along with the antakarana and manas, merged into buddhi, intellect. The buddhi with chitta, antakarana and manas merged into ahankara, egoism. And the ahankara, along with buddhi, chitta, antakarana and manas, all merged into the absolute Brahma. I found myself reflected everywhere in the whole universe. It was all one harmony, full of wisdom, eternal love perennial, and bliss eternal. Where was the body, its tenements, and the I? It was all Satchit Ananda, truth, wisdom, and bliss.
Now this technical language, if you know what all those things mean, it means God realization. if this actually happened. Because all the aspects of the mind all dissolved into the realization of truth. So either he was God realized or he had a very high order of spiritual experience. It's kind of an amazing passage.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's really kind of an awesome thing. So here's where Francis, do you want to read this, Jeanette? This is Francis's one stanza recapitulation. He just put this right in his poem.
The sun was setting over Sri Kailas. I bowed to the four directions, spread my tiger skin on the ice, planted my staff on the right and cried, "Victory to the Lord, my master." Then sat in Siddhasana facing north, fixing his glorious image between my eyes. Cruel winds, bitter cold, snow up to my chest, but unbounded love defeated these enemies. On the third day, the Lord Dattatreya in his physical form came to me, picked me up as a child and caressed me. Manas merged into Antakarana, Antakarana into Chitta, Chitta into Buddhi, into Ahamkara, all into the Satchitananda of the Supreme Self.
So Francis clearly takes this to be authentic. It certainly sounds like it. This is part of this same complex of themes that he's building. And now we have another association with this Mount Kailas thing. Before we've had it as, a mythological story of Shiva and Parvati and Ganga and all this sort of thing. Now there's an actual human experience of something that sure sounds like the realization of God happening there. This is also a part of his idea of art, the very living experience of that truth. Here is another part of this Kailas. Any comments on this? I'm just sort of touching on different things.
When Hamsa is describing that night and how cold it was,
Yeah.
it's, I don't know if any of you
You've lived in cold
experienced
places.
any cold like that. But there was one night where in a terrible blizzard, and it was 17 below Fahrenheit. So that's way, way down there. And I had to go out into it in order to clear out some snow somewhere. And it was blowing a good 35 knots. And I had to have snowshoes on and all dressed up and everything. And I could only stay out for 10 minutes, and that was it. And all of my breath, everything condensed, froze on my beard and mustache. And the only thing that was showing were my eyes. I had everything else covered. It was, and that kind of cold is unbelievable. It's just, and to this guy who's out there.
My practical mind has trouble with the fact that he's got snow up to his chest and he prostrates himself before his master. That's going to be really inelegant. How do you excavate?
Well, he had brought with him a snow shovel.
That was a scam.
But of course,
staff, that's it. Yeah.
It's an image.
Yeah.
Isn't it, where is the picture of Francis sitting on in the snow?
Yes, the Sierras, I think.
High Sierras? Is that what it's called?
That's what I assume. I think it was while he was in California. Now here's another association with this Kailash complex that he brings into his idea of art. And a lot of you, I dare say, have been here. This is the Kailash temple in Allura. So I'll just flick through some of these things. I would love to have a real good art historian explain a whole bunch of them. But how many of you have been there? Probably a bunch of you. Yeah. So now this to Francis, he keeps referring to this. In fact, we read at the beginning of the fourth part, in Allura they built living memorials to God in stone like that. This is true art. This is, so the Kailash, you see all the things he's linked with it, the skyscrapers of New York, Shiva and Parvati and the Ganga flowing down. You know, we've had the experience of Hamsa in this place, actually having this high order of spiritual experience, sounds like God realization. And now he has a whole body of art explicitly associated with the Kailash temple. And I neglected to rip this off from the internet when I was downloading a bunch of this stuff, and now I can't find it. But there is a slide showing the outline of the whole temple, this whole temple in Allura, set against the outline of the mountain. And they matched exactly. So now if that's true, it would suggest that whoever created this had been there and was creating the Kailash temple, a likeness in that sense. Was aware of Mount Kailash. You see.
It took hundreds of years or so to do it.
That's right.
Carved out of one lump of rock.
They revealed it.
Yeah.
They didn't put it on together. They actually excavated the whole thing. So it's an amazing accomplishment. So you see now in this complex we actually have a body of true art. And Francis will contrast this with actually, another one he takes to the woodshed here is Picasso. He contrasts this with Guernica. Maybe we can get to that a little bit, the famous painting of Guernica. So into this whole complex of ideas, we have now art in the ordinary sense. I mean, actual temple carvings. So these are some pictures here. Just flick through some of these.
174, and Erich took us on the bus and came home.
Yeah. Oh, what a tour guide. I did that with him too. Oh my God, what an experience. Yeah, it was something like this, where you saw, and then they mapped the mountain over. Actually, when I was doing some research for this, I went online and I wanted to get images of Kailash, and I saw a little thing and I clicked on it. And lo and behold, Erich's voice came.
Oh,
Wow.
It went on for 45 minutes.
Wow.
Dara
Is
had
it a
brought
YouTube
it in.
thing?
Huh?
Was it a YouTube thing?
Yeah, just a regular YouTube.
amazing.
And Dara, I guess, was carrying a tape
Okay.
recorder, and Erich
Right.
was talking about it.
Yeah, good.
I never would have thought. See that? Now, this is actually not the Kailash temple, Buddha.
This
Buddha's
is
temple.
beautiful.
Let's see, which Baba. I don't know who these guys are. What are they doing here?
It's John Kerry.
It must be John Kidd. He's preparing to deliver his love song.
That's it.
Gussie, yeah.
Gussie and David.
Oh, that's the sky, something.
That's
What's wrong here?
That's right.
Yeah, and that's where Mount Kailash is,
Ah.
right up there. So it's, I guess it's in China now.
It's pretty high. Like he said, the lake was 19,000 feet. Kailash, he estimated another 10,000 feet.
Yeah, it's actually not quite that high. The mountain's about 21,000 feet or something. But I guess that little pond is a bitch to get to. It's not on the trail going around it. You have to go up a lot higher to get there. So let's see what we're doing. Here is, let me see, we covered all the things I wanted to. Yeah, now here is just to finish up on this vertical axis theme, I'm just trying to bring in some of the complexes of associations that Francis has tied into this that I can see. Here we'll get another one. Let's see. And this comes up a bunch of times too. This is, let's see. Yeah. Okay, number 12. Anyone want to read this?
Ideograms. Draw a vertical line. Down this we came in search of answer to our question, who am I?
Okay, so here's the vertical line.
Draw a horizontal line across the bottom, would
There we go.
rock bottom.
This is rock.
Metal-bodied, metal-brained, plant, worm, fish, bird, beast, man-bodied, brain. Man-bodied, man-brained, the goal of form, full consciousness of gross world finiteness, the rock bottom, terminus, and turning point.
Okay, so this is actually human form. We've come all the way down here now.
Raise up the horizontal line and begin the glory road.
I don't know how to do it. I guess I can draw a bunch of them. Huh?
The glory road through 6 planes of singing. 2 lines now also the cross of crucifixion.
Yeah, isn't that a beautiful figure? So this would be the cross. And so it's the climbing up of the vertical line of the horizontality of our existence, the plane of our existence, the makam, to use that term.
On the 5th plane, the real singing begins. The secondary art, devotion.
Why is it the secondary art?
Because the primary art is romance.
That's right, that's the real one. But this is, you can only do really the secondary art once you're on the 5th plane. Before that, you're just a beginner.
On the 6th plane, the divine love play of lover and beloved. The top is the 7th plane, where both lines vanish. Actually, they were never marked by you on paper.
Right. So you see the same thing. So you'll see the same idea of his expressed in many forms throughout this entire book. Now, let's see. Let me come to this other theme. I think we've talked about the vertical axis here, which I have down here, which is so central to his whole idea of art, well, central to the whole complex. But now here is to come to a different theme that we've seen a lot of times throughout the entire poem. The theme of the sun, moon, Jalali, Jamali. Did I put it? Yeah, and here's where it first really came up. This was in book 1. And here we see it, we saw it in the true form, the Jalali, Jamali. He never uses those words, but I think clearly that's what he means. By the way, Stephen sent me a quote from Baba about this that's wonderful. I wish I had put it up here. It's in Listen Humanity, Chen, you may know about war. There's something about war. It talks about 2 phases in the divine cycling of things, God's glorification and beatitude. But that actually comes from another quote where Baba gave the Persian words Jalali Jamali. Well, it seems to me very obvious that that's what Francis is talking about. So just to recall this for those of you who may remember this, his transition, this is at the Manzuli mean, from one role to the other was as swift as when turning from the moon to look at the sun, when both are in the sky. And his expression of mood as extreme, the cool gentleness of the moon and the fierce burning of the sun. Gold is the face of the moon to the eyes of children and lovers, and gold is the sun in the blood of nursling heroes. And the moon's sun man is the gold of God in the hearts of hero lovers. And so he goes on for about 2 or 3 pages on this theme, actually. He really establishes it with a lot of force at this juncture. Where's, let me find in my notes where I have all my references to this. In book 3, as we were looking at, let's see, 17 is the one. No, it's not here. It's not here either. Sorry, I'll get it. Yeah. So now we're in book 5. We have another statement of this same theme. He's bringing it back to this. On the one hand, the man unspeakably glorious, and on the other, the woman unnameably beautiful. Sometimes, a disciple said, and I think this would be Abode. Baba had Francis take the names of the Abode. When I repeat the name, I feel the qualities of the moon. I become the moon and experience bliss. Sometimes, when I repeat the name, I feel the qualities of the sun. I become the sun and overpowered fall senseless to the ground. Moon gleam and sunbeat. Artemis's gentle arrows. I don't know if you know Artemis, one of the Greek goddesses. Diana would be her Roman name. She's associated with them as an archer. And rivers and words of enchantment. The sun god's brazen arrows. This would be Apollo. He's the god of the sun. Wounding the mouth of the parched earth. And it's still calling. How long is the path to God's feet? Rain, rain, the healing gentle rain. Beautiful line there. Moving line there. So you see the theme has come up, has been restated here. In the 3rd book, do you remember that passage where he's talking about reincarnation, and there's reaching human form, and the moon, and you're on the beach, the moon rising, and the surf pounding. Remember that stanza? Kissing and honey of kisses and all that sort of thing. And then the next stanza, the sun comes up, and suddenly you've got Kali licking votaries into blast furnaces and hammered streets and goose-stepping, all this kind of thing. I don't know if you remember this section. That was a transformation of the moon-sun theme, where there the moon becomes the sustainer of delusions, and sun becomes the light of truth that exposes illusions for what they are. And at the end of that book, and in the 4th book that follows, Francis is saying you need to take the sun path. And the reason you need to take the sun path is when you're in human form, you have to pass through annihilation, the annihilation of dreams and delusions, right? So we've seen transformations of this theme. I'm just trying to recall all of this throughout the whole book. It's really a big theme throughout the whole book. Well, a form which it takes in book 5, which we've alluded to, is the Aries Aphrodite theme. And let's see, I'll just pop some of these. Oops, this isn't it. Wrong one. Here we go. And anyone know this story? Aries Aphrodite's Hephaestus?
Well, you told us the story.
Yeah, you've heard this before. Yeah. Where Aries and Aphrodite are having an affair. And Aphrodite is actually the wife of Hephaestus, who's the smith. And Francis associates him with Agni, fire, and state of God. And Hephaestus is lame, so she's not so hot and sexy as Aries is. So Aphrodite goes for Aries. And Hephaestus finds out, because Helios, the sun, who can see everything, sees it and tells him. So Hephaestus spins this invisible net and tells his wife he's going off to Lemnos, where he's got some devotees. And meanwhile, he doesn't go at all. And when they jump into bed, the net falls and traps them. And all the gods come into the room and see this farce, And Hephaestus comes and he wants his dowry back, or whoever gave dowry. And I think, I forget, Poseidon offers to pay. And it's a ridiculous farce. This is right in Homer. This is right in the Odyssey. This is told. At the very same place where Odysseus is actually given conveyance back to Ithaca, at that place. So I think this theme gets mentioned in the last book of Stay with God something like 10 times. Francis keeps coming back to it over and over and over again. And the significance of it, we've already mentioned, but it's like when he earlier on, he's talking about Jesus and Christianity and how Jesus has just been turned into a lamb and the lion has been forgotten. And this is symptomatic of the severance of the integral wholeness of the perfect one who has both the Jalali and the Jamali in perfect integration and oneness. But when you have the degradation of this, which has happened in the modern world, then the Jalali, instead of being the majesty and the glory and awesomeness of God, becomes blustering, violence. And the Jamali, instead of being the beauteous and mysterious and the lovely and the hidden and the alluring, that inspires, great, inspires art, the great inspirer of art. Instead, you have like Venus the sex pot, or sentimentalized feeling, or cheapness. And these two kind of in alliance with each other kind of keep people like a carrot in front of the donkey, keep plodding along. And both have been degraded into base. So that is a symbol for what has happened to modern culture. It's one of the dominant symbols in this whole last section of State of God. And here are a couple.
Muhammad's sort of been shown as the Jalali.
What's that?
Muhammad's been shown as like this perception that Muhammad is like the Jalali aspect of Islam.
Muhammad is the Jalali.
Well, there's that perception in the world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He did. It does seem there was a strong manifestation of the Jalali with Muhammad. And with Jesus, there was a strong expression of the Jamali that would seem to be true. But there's always the other side with both of those if you really know about their lives. Muhammad wasn't this violent.
The modern world
The modern world sees it that way.
The Western.
Yeah, just as a lot of the world sees Jesus as just sort of nice. Whereas Francis keeps saying he was a warrior. Every time he mentions him, he calls him a warrior. Jesus in particular. So here are just a couple of these passages. Let me see. Such extensive notes that now I don't even remember where I have the ones. Well, our time is just about done anyway. But in one of them, oh yeah, here we go. Yeah, now he associates this, Francis associates this a lot in his historical narrative with colonialism. So here he moved out. This is the West, after the Renaissance expressed its aggression on the world. This would be the Aries thing. Foot slogging it to receding horizons. This isn't the best one, but began bubble whizzing, dreaming of, and Aphrodite making a damn fool of herself going to bed with Ares, because Hephaestus threw strong bands around them, and the other gods witted the joke of it, even Zeus probably on the side, and she was well wishing to be free of the blusterer's embrace. So you can see there's an actual recitation of the story in a short form. Here we have, let's see, so to Muhammad's time, a journey continuous from us to God and direct from God to us, and for 1,000 years after, when the twilight of our present night set in, and we no longer worked with love with our eyes, worked and loved with our eyes upon the image in our hearts. We looked out. You see, this is that basic breach. Instead of looking in, we started looking out. And instead of waging the real war within, we read in an earlier earlier session, what the real war is. We wage the war without.
Yeah, perspective.
Yeah, that's right. And that's sort of like the three-dimensionality of art that comes to birth in the Renaissance and perspective. Francis is saying the real three-dimensionality was the primitive tribesmen dancing out of the real. You know, instead of the outer realism, the inner realism. We looked out and stared at the horizon, blank with promise of release from our restricted forms. We looked out and set out to no whither, with oars croaking and rowlock. You see, this is really, the imperialistic invasion of the Western Hemisphere and other parts of the world. And flag hoisted beyond sail at masthead, wave beating, the waves that beat upon our ships, scurvy and lice-ridden, our beards and eyes wet with salt of strange tears, and our weeping, not for yellow gold and fine silks and new foods to glut our glutting, though that obviously was a lot of what the colonialism was about, but for a new God, to enthrone above God, one greater than Jesus and Muhammad, who would not require of us sacrifice and prayer. And we easily found him, since he was also looking for us. In fact, he had accompanied us in our laborious ships and appeared on the land before us when we landed, greeted us and initiated us into service. His name was Ares, and his bedfellow, Aphrodite. You see these two. There's the violence and there's the sentimentalized feelings, cheapening of things. And they showed us the new altar building and its rites. But our seamen, thick-muscled fools of the oar, still clung to Jesus, and we would sometimes come upon them secretly remembering him. So we slew Jesus on Ares' altar and told men that he had died, but that his spirit would be upon them if they yielded us good service. Christ Ares, two, but in reality, one. And Aphrodite's city to sack for our pleasure. And to please our men, we wrote them a book with tunes in it they could easily sing. So you see, a lot of Francis's critique of the modern world is exploring the implications of this. The cheapening of the glory and majesty of God into violence and aggression and outward movement, and the cheapening of true sensibility and higher feeling and love into just sentimentality and sex and cheapness of all sorts. So this is a theme that he set up in the very first book and has been developing all the way along. And it's right into his critique of modern civilization in the last section. So with that, why don't we close it? We'll have one more session next week, and that's it.
Good. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.